Hello, everyone. It's Philip Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. And today is the 25th of March of 2022. Today's topic is Monumental Lies. In this morning's Richmond Times podcast, Pulitzer Prize winning columnist Michael Paul Williams asserts that the reason there were no Confederate monuments in the city until the 1890s and afterward was because whites wanted them to symbolize the return of white supremacy after the end of Reconstruction. He implies that if the statues were intended to honor the fallen soldiers, they would have been erected when the war ended in 1865. He further opines that the statues erected up until even the mid-1920s were chiefly intended to reinforce the symbolism of white supremacy, while Richmond Black voices were progressively silenced. Now, he's wrong for two reasons. First, penniless Southerners were unable to pay for the monuments for many years after the war ended. They instead had to content themselves with laying flowers on the graves of the fallen, which sometimes included Northern soldiers who died while they were stationed in the South. According to Professors William Cooper and Thomas Terrell in their textbook, The American South, as late as 1900, which was 35 years after the war ended, the per capita income percentile ranking in the South was half that of the national average. Now, what that means is that outside the South, the average income, the average per capita income was more than twice of what it was in the South. Even as late as 1930, their figures show that the percentile ranking of per capita income in the South was only 55% of the national average. That's 65, 70 years after the war had ended. Moreover, unlike the anti-Confederate statues going up now in the South, examples such as the Rumors of War statue in Richmond, there were few wealthy foundations to make donations for 19th century and early 20th century Confederate statues. They were typically paid for by donations from thousands upon thousands of ordinary citizens, including some Black Southerners. Second, few people today recognize the magnitude of the losses suffered by the white families during the Civil War. At least 5% of the white population from which the Confederacy drew her soldiers were killed during that war. If America were to fight a war today and suffer proportional losses, our dead would total 17 million. That's nearly 3 times the number of Jews killed during the Nazi Holocaust, and many people are familiar with that figure. And it's 40 times the number of American soldiers killed in World War II. Given such an oblation, only a cynic could conclude that the surviving Southern family members were not chiefly motivated to build the statues by a desire to memorialize the loved and lost, particularly considering that many never returned, having died in faraway battlefields. Now, to continue, I need to share with you a picture here that I'm going to talk about. Let me pull up the picture. Okay. I think you can see it over there. And I'm going to continue my narrative now. In point of fact, there is good reason to believe that Michael Paul Williams of the Richmond Dispatch is just such a cynic. The photo above is of Richmond's 40th annual Emancipation Day parade. And as you can see, Blacks were free to march joyfully through the city to celebrate the day, at least 15 years after Robert E. Lee's monument had been erected on Monument Avenue. If the Lee Monument and others were intended to intimidate Blacks and remind them to stay in their place where they would be under the thumb of white supremacy, that parade would not have been allowed. But as you can see, there's the proof. There's the picture. That parade happened, and they continued with that annually. I don't know when it ended, but it certainly lasted beyond 1905. Now consider the situation today. If the sons of Confederate veterans were to march in Richmond today to honor their ancestors, oh God, nobody can doubt that if they were ever to apply for a permit, it would not be issued. And if somehow they did march, the regime media would attack them viciously and even encourage protesters and demonstrators to attack them, in my opinion. If there were somehow, if they were somehow to march, no doubt they would get protested and perhaps even attacked. And I want to stop sharing that photo so I can get back to looking at you. So just give me a minute to do that. And I want to finish up. I'm going to wrap up now. All right. Mr. Williams provides other observations during the podcast, suggesting that he is really an entitled race hustler. First, he argues that America is currently experiencing an unjustified backlash to the statue removals. To paraphrase, he says something like, after, you can listen to the podcast, and here's my paraphrasing. After Reconstruction, there came a backlash of the 1890s. He's saying, okay, we had Reconstruction and that ended, and then there was a white backlash of the 1890s. And what he's saying is it's happening again. Now, after Obama's presidency comes a second backlash. That's his point. But such a remark ignores the fact that Obama could not have been elected and re-elected president without white votes. Blacks represent only 13% of Americans' population. Second, when Williams started working for the Richmond Times 40 years ago, he was hired by whites. 10 years later, his white bosses gave him the opportunity to become a columnist because he argued that blacks were not sufficiently represented in the newspaper. Even though he boasts that some of his anti-tradition views stirred up controversy in the community, his white employers backed him. Apparently, they gave him freedom to express those views. They certainly didn't fire him. Now that he is no longer, quote, speaking truth to power, because he is presently an integral part of the power structure. He is part of the power elite. He's no longer speaking truth to power. He is dictating power to the rest of us peons. He wants to, now that he's no longer speaking truth to power, he wants to censor views contrary to his own. He doesn't want Confederate statues anywhere in the country, except possibly in museums where they can be ridiculed with so-called textualization plaques. He visualizes Richmond as the epicenter of a movement to have the statues raised everywhere in the country. The Richmond Times and Michael Paul Williams are two good reasons to tell your representatives in Washington to vote against the federal subsidies that the Biden administration is trying to give to newspapers. Tell them to kill the Save the Local News Act. That's the name of the act. Save Local News Act. Tell them to kill that one. It gives your federal tax dollars to legacy newspapers and gives them certain antitrust exemptions to make big tech promote their views. If the government is going to be giving money directly to the newspapers, how can anyone expect the newspapers to be objective? Ultimately, they're going to come under, they're just going to be mouthpieces for the government. They already are. And that's one reason this bill is before Congress, is because they're basically, Biden is saying, okay, you do my bidding and I'll try and get you some money. Okay. To get to the bottom of this, you'll find my book, The Dreadful Frauds, Critical Race Theory and Identity Politics, to be helpful, quite helpful. You can buy it on Amazon for $16, and paperback you can get a Kindle for $6. If you want a autograph copy, email me, Phil, P-H-I-L _Leigh, L-E-I-G-H @ me.com. Okay, that's our show for today, and thanks for watching.